In 2021, the world lost one of its greatest literary minds. Kentaro Miura might have mostly worked in the manga industry, but the impact of his masterpiece is global. Entire franchises have been inspired by his creation, so when he passed away, it was a blow to not just the manga industry, but the entertainment world as a whole. It also left Berserk fans devastated in particular because with Miura gone, we'll no longer be getting his vision for how his story should have ended. That's why it's sort of haunting that the final chapter he ever penned for this series sort of ties things up in the most beautifully melancholic way. Berserk 364 is a chapter about new beginnings and old ghosts showing up one last time to wreak havoc upon the world of our protagonists. There are several callbacks to previous chapters, and for the most part, it plays out a bit like an epilogue. But its ending is perhaps the biggest emotional gut punch we've ever received, and to call it bittersweet would be an understatement. That's why in this video, we're going to do a deep dive on every page and panel from chapter 364 and trace their connections to other parts of the story. So without further ado, let's get right to it. The Moonlight Boy's return. Chapter 364 begins with perhaps the most important characters from the later arcs of Berserk. Standing in the glow of the moonlight, we see the Moonlight Boy looking at Guts with those huge dreamy eyes of his. Guts is shocked by the boy's appearance because this is like the fourth time he's shown up unannounced, but their interaction on this particular instance isn't as standoffish as it was when the boy first debuted in the manga. The Moonlight Boy came into the picture in chapter 238, and right off the bat, you could tell that while he stuck to Casca like glue, Guts made him feel a little scared. He looked at him with eyes that were dripping with fear, but he let it go and started climbing on his back, using Guts' cape as a makeshift ladder. Back then, Guts tried to pull him off frantically and nearly dropped the kid on a stack of throwing knives, but this time he doesn't even touch the guy. He just piggybacks him all the way back to the village of Elfhelm, where he hands him off to his companions so the Moonlight Boy can spend time with the one person he knows he wants to see, Casca. In chapter 238, both Guts and Casca catch the kid before he hits the throwing knives, and for a moment, the three of them look like a proper family, mother and father fussing over their adorable baby boy. And while they don't know it at the time, that's exactly what they are to the Moonlight Boy. In chapter 238, after spending a whole day with the kid, Guts thinks about the demon child for the first time. The baby, born from his tryst with Casca and tainted by the foul seed of Femto Griffith, was an entity that Guts hated for a long time because of what it represented. It was the product of all the evils that turned him into the Black Swordsman, but when he thought of the child in chapter 238 for the first time in his life, he did so without any ill intent or malice in his heart. Instead, he wondered if the demon child was still out there somewhere, struggling against an unjust world just like himself. He didn't know it at the time, but the kid was right there in the room with him, and his thoughts must have reached the demon child because it was only after this moment that he started acting friendly with Guts. He saved him from losing himself to the Berserker armor on two crucial occasions. Once on the beach of Ratanus, where he was fighting against the Kushan familiars, and then again during the battle with the Sea God, where the Moonlight Boy's ethereal form guided Guts towards the surface. Perhaps it's because of those two instances that Guts has considerably softened towards the kid's presence, and it's clear to us that he knows the Moonlight Boy has a strong bond with Casca because his first thought was taking him to her. As he does so, we get an adorable moment where Shirkei's magical prowess unravels for the first time. All this while, she had assumed that the Moonlight Boy was an emissary from Elfhelm, possibly Danon herself. But when Danon showed up with pumpkin pie and asked who the boy was, Shirkei went red in the face and Isidro couldn't help jumping on the opportunity to show up the witch who keeps showing him up. This fun little moment leads into a montage of moments that holds up a rosy mirror to the dark journey that brought the gang to Elfhelm in the first place. Their perilous journey reversed. Chapter 364 plays out like a page from a dream for our main characters because in it, they find the two things that have eluded them their entire lives: peace and family. Every single one of Guts' companions has a story that might differ when it comes to details, but they're quite similar in their overall trajectories. Guts was born from his mother's hanging corpse and taken in by a half-crazy camp follower of a mercenary band. He was raised by a brutal and abusive mercenary, and though he considered that man to be his father, he never really knew what family life was truly like. Casca did, being the youngest daughter of a poor and rather sizable farming family, but she was sold to a nobleman in lieu of their poverty and then became a mercenary herself choosing the sword over returning to the despair that pervaded her home. Isidro ran away from his home because he wanted to make something of himself in the world, and though he has considerable skills for a boy of his age when it comes to combat and street smarts, saying that his journey was a peaceful one would be a massive lie. Then we have Farnace and Serpico, both born from the loins of the same father, both brought up in wildly different environments, yet they knew the same pain of solitude and isolation and never quite thought of their families as being their families. Farnace came from the rich Van Diemen family, where throwing money at a problem was considered to be quite normal, and though she lived in a large mansion with dozens of servants, she never stopped feeling alone. Serpico, on the other hand, was forced to live with his impoverished and dementia-afflicted mom on the other side of town as Farnace, and his upbringing involved him getting bullied relentlessly and maturing well before his age. They found some solace in each other once Serpico became Farnace's attendant, but their familial relationship remains a secret from the latter, which prevents them from being truly affectionate to one another. And then there's Shirke, the young witch of the forest who considered her mistress to be her mother as well, and viewed the world outside of their spiritual domain as a savage, barbaric landscape. When all of these people were brought together by the threads of causality, it didn't feel like they were family members. It felt like they were survivors of a cruel world, banding together to see the sun shine upon them for just one more day. Their days were spent foraging and training, and their nights were spent applying that training against evil spirits, possessed corpses, nightmarish monsters, and you name it. The Black Swordsman party fought familiar soldiers and animals, an eastern wizard with immense magical powers, the strongest apostle in the series, and a literal godlike entity, all the while surviving by the skin of their teeth. So, when we see them just kicking back and relaxing, going through their daily routine without any of the dangers or perils that had been involved up until their arrival on Elfhelm, it feels like a piece that's extremely well-deserved. A large part of 364 focuses on the Moonlight Boy's exploits with the gang, and it's such a departure from everything that happened previously in Berserk that one could even call it a fitting conclusion for the franchise. We start off with Casca taking the boy to witness Shirke and Farnace's magic training, which used to be focused on improvisation and actual battle experience. Now they're having proper magic classes with all sorts of astral beings like elves and gnomes and golems surrounding them and frolicking about as though they're in paradise. Danon remarks that the Moonlight Boy's origins might be mysterious, but one thing is quite clear: he doesn't possess even an ounce of malice within him. She senses that he's not a mere child of man, which hints at the boy's true demonic origins, but somehow, when the demon child becomes the Moonlight Boy, his spiritual energy aligns with the positive source of power that enables beings like elves to exist within this world. In fact, he joins up with Elfhelm's entities and starts directing their play, making them follow him around in a line and then doing morning exercise with them while Puck's relatives hover over his head like a living crown. Even Isidro's training, which mostly includes combat, is so relaxed that he can say he's had a good workout without quipping about life or death situations, and then we see a montage of the gang doing things that they also did while on the road, but with a kind of peace that hasn't really been present in their lives. We see Yzma going fishing with the Moonlight Boy on her back, and Casca knocking Isidro into the water because she's worried the kid will accidentally drown. We see Serpico cooking food for the group and hanging their clothes on beams, only they don't have to worry about things like trolls or ogres anymore. Farnace says that this life they're currently experiencing is, quote, so peaceful, and she even remarks that Casca's deep bond with the Moonlight Boy could be the key to healing her mind. She doesn't know how right she is in saying that, because when she entered the Corridor of Dreams to restore Casca's sanity with Shirke, the demon child formed the nexus of Casca's scattered consciousness. It was what held her together the whole time she was Elaine the mindless girl, and seeing them act like mother and child brought everyone else as much joy as it did her. After this remark is made, Serpico mentions that their group feels like one large family, and this is a massive admission from him. Serpico isn't the kind of guy who speaks his mind openly. He detested his family for a long time because his mother forced him to be someone he wasn't, and then his biological father hired him as a servant for his half-sister while imploring him to keep his birth circumstances a secret. While Serpico has never aspired to nobility, it's undisputable that if he had, he'd outperform all of Frederico Van Diemen's children because he's just that good. He's a fencer without peer, he possesses immense knowledge about history, geography, and the politics of the world, and he's shown himself to be practical, level-headed, and even decisive in moments of need. The entire time he was with Farnace in Vritannis, he longed to tell her about their familial connection and even spurned her advances towards him because of that, for he felt like this admission would finally give him the family he'd never had. Him saying that this group feels like one big family is extremely out of character for him in the best, most wholesome way possible, and both Shirke and Farnace agreeing with his assertion is a huge moment for them as well, because Farnese always felt like she was alone despite having a family, and Shirke was doubtful about whether these guys were part of her fate from the beginning. The young witch had spent her whole life being raised and trained by Flora and had developed a disdain for humanity on account of its cruel treatment of spiritual beings. She also had a fear of being accepted by anyone outside of Flora because, as an isolated child, social interactions were awkward for her. When she first entered the city of Ratanus, Shirke was horrified by the way humans treated each other, but slowly she came to accept that even the world of man had something beautiful to offer. And when she finally reached and was accepted by the mage community of Elfhelm, she finally felt like she was home. However, this is where the peaceful and family-oriented quote-unquote ending of Berserk begins and ends, because as Shirke acknowledges that they've become a strong unit, her thoughts wander to the one person who remains an outsider: Guts. Guts' training and isolation. In Chapter 364, there are two moments where characters make ominous references to Guts. The first is when Danon talks about the Moonlight Boy shortly after his appearance on the island. She had been warned by Flora's dream oracles that her apprentice would be arriving at Elfhelm soon, and that much had come true, but she'd also been informed that peculiar things would happen on nights of the full moon to them, and when she saw the Moonlight Boy, she realized that this kid was the one Flora was telling her about. Danon explained that the Moonlight Boy was able to find Elfhelm, a location that is usually hidden from the outside world, because of two reasons. The first was that the community had accepted Guts' party as a part of their village, which was symbolized by the clothes that Shirke, Farnese, and Casca were wearing. Shirke was a magic user, so her witch's garb was like a shining beacon for the boy. Farnese had been given Danon's old clothes, so she was cosplaying as Elfhelm's ruler in a way, and Casca was given elven hunting garb, which also made her a part of the island's community. These aspects guided the Moonlight Boy towards Elfhelm's positive spiritual affinity, which is how he showed up on the island, but that wasn't it. The Black Swordsman party's personal relations with the kid also played a major role in his appearance, particularly Casca's and Guts's. Even without being told that they were the Moonlight Boy's parents, Danon could sense that the bond between these three went beyond one of rescuers of an unknown child, but when her thoughts turned to Guts, they trailed off in a way that suggested that there was something wrong with their bond. Of course, we know that for 2 years straight, Guts threatened to kill his own child on account of it being a demon, and that he had wanted to crush it to death the moment it was born. Sure, after reuniting with Casca, his thoughts on the matter changed, but that didn't erase his past acts entirely, and the demon child, as the Moonlight Boy, could sense that. It was only after he saw that his dad wasn't going to try to kill him anymore that he became more playful with him and started helping him out. But what happens if Guts realizes this kid and his kid are one and the same? His vengeful heart and the black malice that burns within him is still a huge part of his overall personality, and in fact, he's probably the only person who doesn't want to stick around in this safe and peaceful place for one more second than he needs to. In the chapters leading up to this one, we see Guts occupying himself by engaging in his usual training routines, swinging Dragon Slayer hundreds of times to keep both it and himself sharp. But he knows that this serene atmosphere is not the kind of environment he needs to pursue his true dream, which is to capture Griffith and exact revenge upon him. He even says this to himself as he thinks about what Casca's going through with the Quarter of Dreams ritual, and it's clear to us that Guts hasn't let go of his desire for vengeance fully. Also, after the ritual is completed, Casca can interact with pretty much everyone else quite normally, but whenever she sees Guts, she has a complete mental breakdown because he's the one remnant of her trauma from the eclipse. In fact, Guts nearly assaulted her in Chapter 190, and it's more than likely that her unconscious brain remembers that as clear as day. That's why when she sees him for the first time after returning to her normal self, she sees all the images from the eclipse that broke her mind in the first place. Somehow, he's become a part of her trauma, and working through that is extremely difficult for her in the moment. This frustrates, enrages, and saddens Guts more than anything else in his life. He'd spent over 200 chapters trying to get her back, and now that she was, he couldn't even see her. When Serpico comments that they've all become one big family, Shirke's thoughts turn to Guts because she knows all his efforts haven't paid off the way he wanted them to, and that saddens her deeply as well. The group came together because of Guts in the first place, so to see him not getting what he wants is like taking a dagger to the heart. And speaking of daggers, Guts isn't even capable of wielding one with the terrifying accuracy he once possessed thanks to the effects of the Berserker armor. After Shirke's thoughts drift to him, the scene shifts from the gang having a good time to Guts training in isolation. He's in front of a waterfall and he's trying to cut its flow off with Dragon Slayer. This is nearly identical to Chapter 48 of Berserk, where we saw what Guts did during his year apart from the Band of the Falcon. He holed up in the mountains with Godot and his daughter and spent his days trying to cut down logs that fell from a waterfall to improve his skills and prepare himself for all kinds of enemies. Back then, Guts had both his arms and eyes, and his aim was near perfect. He could coax a fish out of a stream and nail it with throwing knives like he was judo himself. But now, his sword falls out of his hands when he's doing something as basic as cutting off the waterfall's flow, and his aim has worsened to the point that he can only graze an apple hanging off of a branch instead of nailing it dead center. All of this is happening because of his extended usage of the Berserker armor, which is something Skull Knight warned him about in the chapter right before the Moonlight Boy's debut. Sight, smell, taste, touch. Whenever he fights as the Berserker, Guts would come to lose so many things, and if he doesn't temper himself properly, he would cease to exist as a human being. Well, his vision's getting foggier by the minute, his hands tremble so much he needs to strap Dragon Slayer to them to even use it, and he lost his sense of taste a long time ago. All these side effects of the Berserker armor should have made him realize that relying on it instead of finding peace within himself is slowly killing him, and if he doesn't change his mind about continuing to use the armor without completely mastering it, he'll be in more trouble than he would be without it. At least we get that really cute moment between him and the Moonlight Boy when the kid somehow sneaks into the Berserker armor's breastplate and starts hobbling around while wearing it. He picks up a stick and challenges Guts to a duel, which he obliges while quipping that the boy wants to be a knight, and then he asks him directly what he really is, because Guts doesn't know anything about him besides the fact that he saved his life on 2 occasions, both of which we've already mentioned. It's an extremely heartwarming scene for us readers because this brings Guts' relationship with his son full circle. He started off wanting to kill the baby, and now he's stick fighting with him while adoring his little warrior spirit. It's the kind of fatherly affection that he himself never received from Gambino, and perhaps in another timeline, Guts, Casca, and the Moonlight Boy could have made the very picture of a perfect family. As he musses the child's hair, Guts hears Casca and the rest calling out for him, so he tells him to go be with her. They spend about 2 solid days in this peaceful domain that they've honestly earned after all the hardships they've endured, but then comes the final phase of chapter 364, which, if this was where Berserk had actually concluded, would have left us with a haunting and bittersweet conclusion for the rest of our lives. A single tear like morning dew. After feeding the Moonlight Boy dinner, our gang retires to their chambers, and Casca, now sane and lucid for the first time in close to 3 years, thinks that sleeping with the kid in her arms feels completely natural to her. In fact, ever since the kid first showed up on that moonlit beach, Casca's had a natural motherly instinct towards it, which evokes all kinds of feelings within her. Nostalgia, affection, even a tinge of sadness. She thinks that the beach was where she first got to know the Moonlight Boy, but then she corrects herself and thinks that she's actually known him before that as well, from her time as the mindless girl Elaine. As she probes her own psyche for answers, an image of the demon child protecting her during the incarnation ceremony pops into her head, and Casca wakes up with a sudden jolt. She finally realizes that this boy is her boy, both hers and Guts's, and as this realization dawns upon her, she notices that he's disappeared from their bed. She rushes out to go look for him, passing Shirke, who's still awake for some reason, when she finds him sitting cross-legged in front of Guts, who looks like he's seen a ghost. As the pair continues to observe the child, we get a thought bubble that doesn't come from any of the characters that we've seen up to this point in the chapter. It comes from the main antagonist of the series, Griffith. We'll tell you what he said word for word because as disgusting as Griffith himself is, we feel like this closing sequence of chapter 364 is some of the most moving writing we've ever seen in Berserk. It goes like this. I was dreaming. On nights of the full moon, I'd become a small child and find myself embraced by nostalgic warmth. But when I wake from that dream, all that remains is a faint sense of loneliness. That too soon fades away, along with a single tear like morning dew. There is so much to unpack here because in just these few sentences, Miura packed in so much meaning. Let's start with Casca's realization. The moment she realizes that the Moonlight Boy and the demon child are one and the same, she wakes up with a start because as a mother, she can't believe she's been taking care of her own baby boy all this time. She's also reminded of the events of the Conviction arc where the demon child protected her from evil spirits and all kinds of astral creatures for a solid month. That realization must have hit her like a dump truck because of course it must have. All this time, she thought this kid reminded her of her own kid, when in fact it was her kid. And then we have the Griffith section of the chapter's ending, which compresses all the information we've received about his current existential state into one goosebump-inducing moment. We know that the point of the incarnation ceremony was to bring him to the physical world by using the egg of the perfect world as a vessel, but what ended up happening was that the egg swallowed the demon child's body, right before triggering the ceremony properly out of empathy for a creature it felt a kinship with. The demon child was dying because spending all that time protecting Casca had completely drained its life energy, and without proper nourishment, there was no way it could have survived. When the egg swallowed the child, it ended up merging the child with Griffith's vessel, aka itself. And what ended up happening is that the baby mutated into a regular human baby and then rapidly matured into Griffith's current physical form. This form doesn't have a single soul, it has two souls, Griffith's and the child's. And we get evidence of this in the reunion on the Hill of Swords chapter series. When Griffith returned to Earth, he wanted to see Guts first and foremost because he wanted to confirm that his emotions would no longer control his actions. It was his growing affection for and dependency on Guts that made him nearly give up his dream the first time around, and when he became a God Hand member, his heart was supposed to be frozen. This checked out on the Hill of Swords because seeing Guts didn't trigger any kind of emotion within him, but when he saw that Casca could have been killed by Guts' clash with Zod, Griffith's body moved without his permission to protect her, and he immediately left the scene to figure out why that happened. As he flew away, he felt his frozen heart beating and realized that this feeling didn't belong to him. It belonged to the demon child that had fused into his body, and then the first full moon post-incarnation occurred. He vanished from his campsite and landed in front of Casca in chapter 238, and after going through that process once again, the fact that he was turning into the Moonlight Boy had entered Griffith's awareness. Hell, the last time we saw him before chapter 364, he was acknowledging the fact that he was going to turn into the Moonlight Boy after spending the night with Queen Charlotte. Griffith's initial statements about the Moonlight Boy's influence on him made it seem like he himself felt nothing when the child felt something. But chapter 364's ending flips that idea on its head because it's clearly Griffith who's feeling embraced by the nostalgic warmth of being reunited with Guts and Casca once more. The loneliness he feels is meant to be the loneliness of having sacrificed his men just to become a demonic entity, and the meaning of that single tear he sheds is left for us to decipher. Was he feeling the Moonlight Boy's aching for a permanent reunion with its parents, or was this Griffith crying because he knew he sacrificed everything that made him human and good just to become a vile, villainous tyrant? We don't know, because Miura blurred the lines between their characters that immaculately. And this is why we say that if Berserk ended right here, we would have had no regrets. This open-ended conclusion would have allowed us to think that Griffith crying meant he was remorseful, and that in Miura's mind, he made up for it by doing something that redeemed his character to a certain degree. Because there's no complete redemption for a man who has done the things he's done. Of course, that's no longer the case because Berserk has continued production under Miura's best friend, Mori, who's working on finishing the series based on what he heard directly from Miura himself. But if Berserk hadn't dropped the 20 chapters it has since Miura's untimely death, we think we could have made our peace with chapter 364 being the final chapter, because it gave us what we've wanted for our characters since the story began: peace, happiness, and a story that comes full circle in a way that feels right and wrong at the same time. That's how amazing Kentaro Miura was as an artist, that he could use a chapter focused on menial tasks for the most part to tell a story that still makes us cry, if we're being honest. And that is why chapter 364 will remain in our hearts as the final chapter of Berserk, in a way, for the rest of our lives. Mori might give the series a proper conclusion, but it will never be Miura's conclusion, so it's both appropriate and rather depressing that the final chapter this genius mangaka ever wrote for his magnum opus encapsulated everything about his series in such a beautiful yet chilling manner. Marvelous verdict! Trust us, we could talk about 364 for hours if we wanted to, because it's filled with so many callbacks and references to Berserk's past, present, and future. But for now, we'll end this deep dive right here, because we want to hear what you guys have to say about it. Let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more Berserk content. We'll see you guys soon with another video, so until then, stay safe, and as always, keep on struggling, strugglers.